Welcome to the first episode of our new series, Conservation Travel with Roger Smith, about wildlife and wildlife tourism in Australia. I'm Eliza Anderson, and over the coming episodes, I'll be accompanying you through some inspiring and engaging interviews between our host, Roger Smith, and our fantastic guests. Roger has a long background in conservation as a wildlife tourism operator and as a wildlife guide. He's the Director of Conservation and Sustainability at Australian Geographic Travel and also writes Australian Geographic Magazine's regular Treading Lightly column. To begin this series, we've decided to focus on three fearless women fighting for wildlife, with Dr Amanda Lilleyman as Roger's first guest. Amanda was recently arrested in Darwin, Australia as a result of her efforts to protect endangered shorebirds. But you'll hear more about that during the interview. Amanda Lilleyman is adjunct professor at Charles Darwin University and also holds a PhD and honours in shorebird ecology. She plays such a significant role in educating locals on how to protect and conserve migratory shorebirds in the Northern Territory in Australia. She is also the secretary of BirdLife Top End, but at the foundation of all of that, Amanda is an inspiring and passionate individual with a wealth of knowledge. If you have a passion for birds and wildlife, travel, or nature conservation, this episode definitely has something in it for you. So now, meet your host and his guest, Roger Smith and Amanda Lilleyman.
It's just wonderful to have an opportunity to talk to someone who I've admired for a very long time. Not just for the work you do in regards to birds, especially shorebirds, but also what you've done recently standing up for a very important part of Darwin, a city, by the way, that I believe is probably the best in Australia. I've been there many times. I love Darwin. And it's just a thrill to be able to talk to you about what you've done, particularly in regards to the work that you've done with birds in the Darwin region. My first question is, how important is Darwin to biodiversity?
Darwin is one of the most nature-rich cities in Australia. We have the international airport just 15 minutes away from Darwin City. And within that area, you can see up to 300 species of birds throughout the year.
300.
So that's close to a third of all of Australian birds. And so a few of us have been calling it Darwin, the City of Birds, as a bit of a slogan for the Northern Territory's capital city, because there's nowhere else you can go in Australia in such a small area and see so many species of birds. There's just so much within Darwin City and surrounds. And of course, it's been impacted by development over the years. And there's development plans throughout Darwin and outside of Darwin and in nearby satellite cities, and as well as in the harbour. But there's a very strong environmental movement in the Northern Territory to protect biodiversity and the beautiful green of the city and surrounds.
300 birds just sticks in my brain. And it sort of puts into context that local area around Darwin. Like when we run tours up there, one of the things I find is we don't have to go very far to actually see bird life. I mean, you could go to Kakadu, which I love, by the way. You could go to Litchfield. You could go further afield. But it's a long way to go. But if there's so much to see around Darwin, particularly for one of the largest growing nature-based communities in the world, which is bird watching, why do anything to damage that? And I suppose in that context, you've been working, in the Lee Point area to try and stop the Commonwealth housing development in that area. What is the significance of Lee Point to you?
Well, Lee Point to me carries significant value because it's the sole reason I came to the Northern Territory in the first place over 13 years ago. I came to the Northern Territory, to Darwin, to Lee Point Beach to study the shorebirds. So these are the migratory shorebirds that travel between hemispheres every year. The project I came to work on originally was my honours research, which was all about the conflict, the disturbance of the shorebirds by humans and humans walking their dogs on Lee Point Beach. This is an issue because Lee Point Beach is internationally significant for migratory shorebirds because there's up to 10,000 shorebirds of close to 30 species, and that's of the 37 species of migratory shorebirds that do visit Australia every year. And of those species, many of them are actually listed as threatened species under federal environmental legislation. So we've got this human wildlife conflict happening, and it's an issue that the local community, other people like myself and general birdwatchers, nature lovers have spoken about, complained about for literally decades. So there's been no strategic management of this issue in the Darwin Harbour region ever. So I came to work on that project initially, and then that spurred more than a decade of my own shorebird research to understand and to protect and work on the conservation of these shorebirds. In that time, I've seen many more species listed under federal environmental legislation that continue to decline, and we continue to see the same threats and more to these shorebirds, not only at Lee Point Beach, but also in the rest of Darwin Harbour. So we're seeing that successive governments, local councils, departments like parks, just inactive. They're just not taking action on managing these globally threatened species. And that's something that really drives me in my advocacy work, and which has led me to work as a volunteer to fight for the protection of Lee Point Beach, but also the Lee Point bushland, which is under threat from the Commonwealth's Defence Housing Australia development, which is set to clear bushland for up to 800 more houses, 3,000 more people living within 2 kilometres of an internationally significant bird site, where we already have this human-wildlife conflict, which is unmanaged. But not only that, within that Lee Point bushland, that's where we get 270 species of birds.
That would include the Guldian finch, which is so prominent in birdwatching areas. And it's sort of like the more people you have, the more damage you're going to have. And do you feel that that's having an impact on the birds?
Well, one of the things that I worked on in my honours research initially was looking at the impacts of the disturbance, so the responses of the birds to the different disturbances. So that was whether the birds took flight, or they walked away, or whether they stayed. So it was looking at how close could a human or a human with a dog be to the birds before they would respond. Why that was important was because every time the bird responds, that's going to be a stress response on the body, and the bird is going to fly away, and it's analogous to a predation event. So it's as if it's going to be killed. That bird, that animal, is undergoing a biological response and using critical energy stores wasted on this disturbance event. And that's an issue because shorebirds need to retain and build their fat stores so that they can undertake their migration of 10,000 kilometres. So that was really the big issue, and that's what we've been sharing with the community through education and awareness events every year. Sometimes twice a year we hold these community events to share all of that information, and we get incredible numbers of people turning up and people wanting to engage with shorebirds and with nature, and just be involved in a community that cares about the environment.
Isn't that wonderful? I just find that so fantastic. And for those who don't know Lee Point, it's on the northeastern side of the city of Darwin, and it's sort of like a promontory that points up into the Arafura Sea, I suppose you'd put it. And it's got a magnificent bushland there, which, just incredible. It's a tropical savanna-style bushland with some rainforest in it as well, monsoon rainforest, and it's an extraordinary place. But I suppose one of the things I wanted to ask you, how do you feel having to do this? You know that it has an impact on the birds. What impact does it have on you, Amanda?
So many different emotions come to mind, actually, because last year when bulldozing began at the Defence Housing Australia site at Lee Point, a whole community of people stood up in protest to this development. And that happened because despite government approvals from the Northern Territory government and the Commonwealth government, we're seeing development permit conditions not being followed. We're seeing experts like myself in shorebird ecology being ignored. And now this was particularly hurtful for me because I originally, back in 2016, did the environmental impact study for migratory shorebirds, and the potential impact on these shorebirds from the development. So I did that back then. I outlined the conservation significance of the area using data, using over a decade worth of data to place the area in context of its local and global significance. I then provided a set of recommendations. What ended up happening, which was last year in 2023, so some years after my initial assessment, was that there was an approval given, but there was a breach of the conditions which were linked to the recommendations that I provided. So as a professional in that industry, giving my expert advice, giving my analysis of the situation, and then to be ignored, and then to see a Commonwealth agency breach the conditions that are set to provide regulations on the environment and to protect, presumably to protect these threatened species. That for me, it just felt like, what is the point of giving your existence, your life to this study, to this whole area of research and the protection of these birds when you are just going to be ignored? And that's why we had to fight as a community, and we had to put a stand up to this. And I ended up getting arrested for my activism in that. Why were we being ignored?
You've got better things to do with your time than be arrested, but yet you feel compelled to go out there as a scientist and say, this is what I want you to stop this because my research says that it's wrong. I do know that my partner, Janine, who I think you know, she found a species of finch down at Katherine near the racecourse. She put that up on Facebook, and suddenly birdwatchers from all over Australia wanted to go to Katherine to see this finch. But the important thing I'm saying here is that the value of tourism, particularly nature-based tourism, which is growing exponentially and which Australian Geographic Travel is supporting, through ignoring people like you, the financial benefits of that tourism is being ignored. Now, in the context of a local, have you come across any evidence at all of research into the value of nature-based tourism in the Darwin region?
So ecotourism and avid tourism, as we know, is such a big thing across the world. And in the Northern Territory, if you are in the birdwatching scene, you know that there's so many people visiting this beautiful place to come and see the rich bird life, the birds that you can see here that you can't see anywhere else in the world. And not just in Darwin, down the track towards Katherine and Pine Creek as well. It's incredible bird life. And really, we should be capitalising on that if we are talking about diversifying the economy and we want to invest in local ground-up economies that provide jobs for people that live here in the Northern Territory and have these skills, rather than very extractive industries. But with nature-based tourism, of course, it's if you protect the environment and you invest in the people who can work as tour guides and share their knowledge, then you've got this incredible industry. But one of the things that we don't know is how avid tourism contributes to the Northern Territory economy. So when we've spoken in the past, even as a community group as BirdLife Top End, we've spoken with the Northern Territory government and we've spoken with the tourism branch about this. What they've been able to tell us is that they have interviewed general tourists and asked them about the value of birds to their tourism activities. But what they haven't done is interviewed actual bird watchers or twitchers or pure nature-based tourists to understand how they're coming here, how much they're contributing to our tourism economy. It really makes sense that you understand and get evidence, you get data on the matter that you're interested in, and then you can make the decisions. And this is something we're seeing across the Northern Territory, not only in the tourism sector, but in other areas as well, is that we're just not getting the right evidence or the data to be able to make decisions.
I've come across exactly the same thing. Standing at Nightcliff against the foreshore there doing some bird watching with a group of people on a tour. And what I loved about it was that people were walking past saying, it's so good to see you here doing this. And sometimes I'd turn around and I'd say to them, and these people are actually putting into the economy here And the value of bird watching and nature-based tourism in the world is growing exponentially. I mean, the United States, a huge number of people do it. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. I just wanted to build something into this. We've got a problem with Lee Point, which you put so much time and effort into. But Darwin Harbour, the hub in Darwin Harbour is designed, I think, to distribute gas around the world. But this is also going to have a major impact on bird life and wildlife generally in the Darwin region. Could you just briefly give us a little bit of background on that?
Yeah, so that's the Middle Arm Industrial Precinct, which is a development that was proposed in 2020 by the Territory Economic Recovery Committee, chaired by a bigwig industrial person. And the idea behind the Middle Arm Industrial Precinct is that it's purely a gas hub. It's a gas hub that will see a huge area of the Middle Arm Peninsula cleared, so bulldoze, the destruction of savanna woodland, clearing of mangroves and salt marsh and salt pan habitat, and also dredging of the harbour. So that's the intertidal area, and we'll also see more boats coming in and out of the harbour to service that. It's also an area that's nationally significant for the far eastern curlew, which is the largest shorebird in the world. It's critically endangered, and we've got a population of them here in Darwin Harbour and surrounds. We know that it's not doing well. Why would we then make a decision that is going to affect its habitat? We know that the number one thing we can do as conservation scientists, decision makers, people who care about the environment and nature, is to protect their habitat. But then we've got decision makers, including the federal government, who will be subsidising this to the tune of $1.9 billion to be developed. Why would you make that decision?
This seems to be governments that are hell-bent on industrialising everything that's beautiful around Darwin. We've got a lovely city. It's a beautiful city. It's got lovely murals on the walls of all the birds' lights, and the city's obviously proud of this. And yet all the way around the city, there's this industrialisation that's occurring. And, what do you feel about the future for Darwin and for this industrialisation? Do you think the people of Darwin have got the willpower and the strength to fight this?
Well, it is a difficult one. There's an incredible community of people who care. Unfortunately, we are a minority who are fighting against these very big industries with a lot of money, with government backing the industries. There's also this attitude of, well, it's so hard to make a change. It does really get to you because you put your whole self into it, your whole body, your whole emotion and energy. And then when we just continually come up against these challenges, it can be really hard.
I feel for you. I really do feel for you, but I feel for all of us. I know that Australian Geographic and Australian Geographic Travel will do everything it can to let the world know about this. I'll do my part, Amanda. You've done your part and you're still doing it. I love it for what you're doing. And I'd just like to say thank you very, very much for everything you're doing. It means a huge amount to all of us.
Thank you. And can I just give you an anecdote about the Nightcliff foreshore?
Absolutely.
Which ties in nicely with what you were just talking about. So this morning I went for a bike ride along the Nightcliff foreshore path to go and get my coffee. And the ocean was perfectly glassy and still. I saw a black butcherbird on the path. And
wow. Yeah.
Like, where else can you go and you see a black butcherbird? Like, this is like my backyard kind of thing. And also Tahitian imperial pigeons in copulation.
Oh, wow. Having a bit of fun on the foreshore. Amanda, thank you so much for being part of this. I know during this interview we both got a little bit emotional, and I still am. But it means a lot to me that you've done this. So thank you.
Thanks, Roger and Amanda. Great to see some laughter at the end there. Join us for our next interview in about a month, where Roger will be chatting with Karen Dick, who is the second of our fearless women fighting for wildlife. We'll be heading from Darwin all the way down to Hobart for that one. Karen is also into birds and heads up BirdLife Tasmania. She's a well-known expert on pelagic birds that live on the open seas, like the albatross. She also has a wicked sense of humour. If you'd like to get in touch, you can reach us on this email address. Thanks so much for joining us for our first episode. See you in the next one.